Hi, everybody. This is Angel Arts, and today I am super excited to do my review of Zack Snyder's cut of the Justice League film. Now, just to give you guys a little bit of a background of myself as a DC fan, I pretty much grew up with DC as a child because I grew up in the early 80s, so I was heavily exposed to the Christopher Reeve Superman films. They were, my parents were a big fan of the Christopher Reeve films, so they definitely showed that to me very early in my childhood. I was a big fan of the Tim Burton Batman films that came out, as well as, of course, the 90s Batman the Animated Series, which was super classic. So I wasn't really exposed to Marvel. Even when the X-Men cartoon that came out in the 90s, the X-Men animated show came out in the 90s, I wasn't really into even X-Men until the Bryan Singer X-Men movies started coming up. And then, once that happened, then I was, pretty much all into X-Men. But other than that, I wasn't really super familiar with Marvel. And I think that unless you're, a comic book person, the general public wasn't really like super exposed to Marvel until, of course, the first Iron Man film with Robert Downey Jr. dropped more than 10 years ago, and everybody knows what happened after that. So, the MC universe has been killing it, like just in general, over the last 10 years, like building this amazing, expanded universe. And of course, meanwhile, DC has been kind of slow on the ball, and with all of the Avengers movies have been coming out, they were bound to attempt to do the Justice League film. And so back in 2017, there was a lot of problems with getting the Justice League film out. Long story short, they ended up bringing in Joss Whedon to sort of wrap up and finish the film, did a lot of reshoots, and they ended up with what they ended up. Now, I will preface this by saying that I think that they basically were trying to make the Justice League film feel like a Marvel film. And I don't think that idea in it itself is necessarily a horrible idea, because they were looking at how successful these Marvel films were. They're a little bit lighter in nature, they're a little bit more playful, but they were still really epic. And there's ones that are more successful than others, but in general people tended to really enjoy the Marvel films. And so I think making a little bit of a leap and say, hey, maybe if we were trying to make our films tonally a little bit closer to Marvel, maybe that would be successful. And that was indeed a big risk. That indeed was a very bold idea. And sometimes, taking a risk is important, and sometimes it can have a big payoff, like a very positive payoff. But sometimes the payoff is not so great. And I think in general, that's sort of what happened with 2017's Justice League. So going into watching the Zack Snyder cut, I went in trying to be cautiously optimistic. I hate, I don't like judging things, based on what critics or other reviewers, or even the opinions of my friends have on a film. Especially when it comes to the DC Comics universe, because I just have a special spot in my heart for DC Comics, simply because of my childhood. So, at minimum, I'll go into a movie, just having no expectations and hopefully, being pleasantly surprised. Before I continue, I am going to say that I am going to try to keep the first half of this review to be non-spoilerish, completely non-spoilerish. And then I'll get into more spoilerly things in the second half, and I'll try to make it obvious, when that transition happens. So bottom line, did I enjoy the Zack Snyder cut more than Joss Whedon's theatrical cut? Absolutely. For me, there was no contest. It was just, I went in. It was at like 11 o'clock at night when the movie dropped in HBO Max, and I couldn't watch it any earlier. And I started watching it at 11 o'clock, telling myself, it's a 4 hour movie, it's a 4 hour film, that I would only watch, at most half of it. Well, I couldn't stop. I really couldn't stop. And then when I finally did finish the movie, I couldn't sleep until I went back and like replayed some of the scenes over and over and over again several times. One scene in particular, which I'll talk about later, and basically didn't get to bed until 4 a.m. last night. So, yeah, I thought that it's not a perfect film. I will say it's not a perfect film, and there were a few parts that I felt were weak in the Joss Whedon film, and they were less weak, like slightly better executed in the Zack Snyder film. But overall, I had a great time. I really enjoyed the film a lot. The 4 hours, at least for me, just flew by. Like it didn't feel like 4 hours. Um, and, the main reasons why I personally love the film a lot was because number one, you got so much more character development for characters that desperately needed them compared to the Joss Whedon version. Um, a lot of the characters got way more respect and substance than they got in the Joss Whedon version. I really loved as well just how the Justice League actually were portrayed as a team, working together as a team. Because in the Joss Whedon version, there were moments where the characters would like have quips with each other and they would have these like rivals with each other, and that in and of itself isn't a bad thing. Um, but sometimes it got to the point where they were trying to one up each other and half bicker with each other so much that it just took away from the actual film. And so a lot of that was either cut out or just subdued a bit, which I think is good in terms of setting the overall tone and just the feeling of this film. I think it just goes to show, like, I'm super impressive how, you can take two different movies that have many of the same footage, but because of how it's edited, because of how the coloring, the shading of the movie, and the music and the soundtrack that you add in, and just how it's paced and how it's cut, like are like completely different from each other, despite they have the same takes. So this is like a really cool, like impressive. If a theater class were to use this as a study device, I think that would be like really brilliant. But yeah, I just loved, again, like trying to skirt. I'm trying to skirt away from spoilers, but I just loved that you know they showed that they really did depend on each other, that there was no weakest link amongst the group, or each hero had their moments to shine, and they had their moments to really be relevant, especially in the main climax, especially at the end of the movie. And so that was one of the things when I that I really want to talk about once I get to the spoiler section, that really upset me in the original theatrical film, which I felt like this film did a very, very good job with. I know that the 4 hour length may be a bit intimidating for a lot of viewers, especially more casual viewers who might not be as super hardcore into comic book movies or superhero movies or just DC Universe in general. I 100% get that. But I do think that the movie did something smart in that they divided it up into different chapters or different parts, so it is segmented. So you could, if you wanted to, just watch them in separate chunks, maybe one or two parts and then taking a break. Um, and I think that could help a lot of the more casual viewers in terms of the pacing. But if you think about it, especially considering this is streaming and this is not a film that is put down to the theaters, you know, take the WandaVision show, which I absolutely love. I don't want to get too much into the WandaVision, but WandaVision just recently had been a huge craze, and it's still like a huge craze right now, and super popular. But if you were to take all the episodes of WandaVision and just jam them together, just strung them together into one big giant Marvel movie, which it essentially that's what it is. It's essentially a big giant Marvel movie that happens to be cut into different episodes because it's basically a show as opposed to a movie. You end up with essentially, give or take, like a 6 hour ish movie. And so I don't think anybody was complaining about the length of WandaVision because it was naturally divided up into different episodes. So if you want to, you could go into this film knowing that it's 4 hours, but not seeing it as a 4 hour movie, maybe seeing it as like a mini series that is cut up into different parts. And if you wanted to, you could, watch a couple parts here and there, like you would with a normal show, or you could binge watch. You could binge watch all of the parts together in one sitting, or maybe even having one small break in the middle. And I feel like that might, if you framed it that way, or if you looked at that way, hopefully that 4 hours isn't as intimidating. I think that if the Justice League had been able to set up their universe the same way that Marvel had set it up, in other words, if they had released the Aquaman movie and the Flash movie and the Cyborg movie ahead of time and then did the Justice League, then this film wouldn't have needed to be 4 hours long. But considering how that's not what we have, work with what we got, work with the cards that you're dealt with, in order to compensate for that, Zack Snyder pretty much had to make this that long of a film, as opposed to being able to release the Flash and the Cyborg films, for example. Did I think that they needed to use up the full 4 hours? I think that one of the biggest strengths of this film is that it does take more time to breathe. I said that character development in here and the fact that they were able to make the characters shine more and be more relevant, that happened because we were given more time to do that. And I think that if they attempted to cut it down to the 2 hours that we got from the original Joss Whedon movie, that's why, it just wouldn't have as much of an impact. So I think it definitely needed to be longer than the previous than the Joss Whedon theatrical release. Did it need to be the whole 4 hours? I feel like they could have cut it to a 3.5 hour film, maybe 3 hours and 15-minute film, and you would still have all the important, juicy character development that I was talking about. But I feel like that extra 45 minutes maybe was, even subconsciously, a way to sort of try to pay back the viewers, try to pay back the fans for, being so disappointed in general. If you enjoyed the Joss Whedon film, I'm not trying to spoil that for you if you enjoy it. But I think that unfortunately, the general public seemed to not enjoy it as much. So maybe that extra 45 minutes was a way to just, assuage the people who didn't particularly care for the Joss Whedon, by giving them that extra content, which may not have been necessary, but, for fans who wanted that extra, addition to the lore or extra scenes to, again, let the characters in the story breathe more, I personally don't think it was a terrible thing at all. So now let's get into the more spoiler-ish territory. So you've been warned about spoilers. I am so happy and so excited for Ray Fisher and Ezra Miller because I just felt like in the Joss Whedon version, their characters really got the short end of the stick. Like, I felt that there was just so much missing with Cyborg. Like, he was just kind of there. And, he helped out every now once in a while, but he was, he definitely felt second tier in terms of importance and relevancy to the story. I think that the Flash, Ezra Miller's character, had a little bit more spotlight simply because he was the character that was meant to be, more of the comic relief and was meant to be like lighter. So because he essentially was many of the major deliveries of the jokes, that he did stick out a little bit more than Cyborg. However, the problem with the Flash in the original version is that he just didn't have enough substance, Really, like, in general, all he was the funny Justice League member. He was the silly one. So you never really took him all that seriously in the grand scheme of things. And they didn't really give him enough depth and enough relevance in the overall story. But man, for both those characters, like Cyborg, once you see what like you got with Cyborg with the Snyder cut, Cyborg and Ray Fisher got so gypped, like so crazy gypped. Like all of the stuff going on with his father, you got to learn about, his connection with the actual three cube things. I don't remember what they're called, but that was huge because that gave him very much a relevance to the overall plot, his connection to those cubes. So I'm not really sure why they cut that out, and it really explained a lot about where his powers come from. And they pretty much put down the entire like origin story. So yeah, mad props to Cyborg. I definitely have a soft spot for, and definitely a huge amount of respect for that character than I ever did in the last Joss Whedon. And then for the Flash, oh my gosh, the Flash. There were two scenes that I absolutely love in this film in particular. One was the bank scene with Wonder Woman, but that was, I enjoyed that also with the Joss Whedon version, and in the Zack Snyder version of the Wonder Woman scene at the bank, like they took that to the next level. But because again, I pretty much had seen, a version of that already with the previous version. The part with the Flash, and I think you know what I'm referring to, at the very end when he rewinds time, that was the scene that I needed to watch over and over and over again right after I watched the movie before I finally went to bed, because it was just so powerful and so well done. And it just, like, my heart swelled because I was like, this is like Flash really got to shine in this moment, and he really got to show his value to the team as opposed to what he had in the previous one where he essentially was, pushing a truck around. And then here comes Superman. This is what I was referring to again. Here comes Superman, who basically is stealing his thunder and pretty much was showing off. I mean, that part really upset me a lot because it was one of those things where, like, Superman had a huge ego, in the previous, in the original version. Like, come on, it's the Flash. Like, he's the youngest Avenger. He's the youngest Justice League person. He's very new to, like, this whole superhero business in general. And Superman had to just come in and just show him up. It just felt like why you got to do that? Why you got to, like, kick a puppy like that? So I'm so happy that got cut. And so because of that, I really loved this scene so much. I was, like, tearing up at how amazing it was because of the cinematography and the visual effects were just amazing. Like, from watching the world around him, like, crumbling in reverse, like not crumbling, but uncrumbling in reverse. And even watching like the bodies of the destroyed heroes, like Superman. You got to see Superman. You realized you had respect for what was happening because that blast even destroyed Superman. Um, and you could see all the little parts down to the little fragments of the bone, which was amazing. And like that was like some Mortal Kombat stuff there. Um, and also, of course, like Cyborg, being rebuilt again in reverse. And the music, like that soundtrack that was playing with the Flash during that scene. I'm telling you, I'm gonna be playing that music. I'm gonna be listening to that music, like every time I go out running, at least for the next like week or so, because I just really love the soundtrack. Everything about that whole scene was so beautiful, and it just showed that, you know, again, they worked as a team. They didn't rely on the one person. You know, the Joss Whedon was basically, the Justice League is great as long as Superman's around. That was the message that I got. And so it was moments like this where, Superman, he was there, but he wasn't like, it wasn't like Goku, where everybody was just holding the enemy off so that Goku can come in and just save the day. It didn't feel like that in this version. He had his role to play, but so did everybody else. And then we get to Cyborg, because his main purpose for the climax was to separate the three boxes away from each other. And again, Superman can't do that. That's a Cyborg thing. Superman, like, I think at minimum, Cyborg asks him for help later, but he had to be the one to, like, initiate it. And Superman just came to assist, and I love that. And of course, that moment where he has that vision of himself, and his parents, and how they were saying, "Oh, my broken child," and you don't have to be alone anymore. And his response to them was just so beautiful, and like the payoff of that was so great. And it earned. That's the thing. The climax earned it. They earned that climax so much. And again, teamwork. Like the Flash and Batman and Cyborg, they did their thing up to this point. By the time they separated the blocks, and then in comes Aquaman and stabs him through the chest with his trident, and then Superman follows up with a punch, and then finally, Wonder Woman comes in and does a finishing move. It's like they were playing basketball, like, passing the ball around, which is exactly what I wanted. They were a team. It wasn't, Superman and the sidekicks. They were a team. And I think that was my biggest takeaway from this film, and why I love this film so much. So that's pretty much my review of the Justice League Snyder Cut. So if you end up watching it yourselves, please post in the comment sections what you think, and let me know how you compare this film with the Joss Whedon version, and not just the Joss Whedon version, but just superhero films as a whole, or just DC Comics films as a whole. What are your thoughts and what are your feelings about it? I would love to hear about it. So thank you guys so much for watching, and until next time, love yourselves and love each other.